Good evening, familia. Good evening, my friends. This is Ray Collazo, and you're watching and listening to the Found in Translation talk show. Found in Translation stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. Thank you again for joining us. This is your host, Ray Collazo. And again, you're watching and listening to the Found in Translation talk show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. And if you're talking about politics, it doesn't get any hotter than Super Tuesday, Martes Calientes. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Again, thank you for joining us live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube Live, as a YouTube talk show, or as for our audio files, anywhere you can download a podcast, and of course, as a radio program on WPPMLP 106.5 FM. Well, we could talk about Gentefied or Bad Bunny's new album. We're going to talk about that later in the week. A lot of stuff going on in our community. But tonight, we got to talk about Super Tuesday. This has gone out of control. So just days ago, it looked like the progressive scion from Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders, was going to, in essence, sort of cruise or take a commanding lead as at Super Tuesday. But some incredible events, beginning with what seems to be the moment of this presidential campaign, of all things, an endorsement by a congressman, James Clyburn in South Carolina, led to a huge victory for Senator Joe and Vice President Joe Biden. That was followed by a series of withdrawals of some of the other minor moderate candidates and a coalescing, apparently, of the Democratic establishment. What we want to talk on the show today, Super Tuesday edition, is we want to give you sort of a sense of what that dynamic means for our community, but also what that means potentially for the results we're seeing coast to coast around the country. We want to talk about how the Latino vote is impacting this race, and has obviously made a big impact and almost seems to have pushed the Democratic establishment, the more moderate wing of the party, to coalesce around the vice president. We're going to talk to activists, people on the ground mobilizing voters, some as local community activists, some on behalf of candidates of their choice, whether it's supporters of Sanders, Senator Warren, Vice President Biden. Maybe we'll have a Bloomberg supporter in the mix. I doubt a Tulsi person will come around. I don't think they have the guts to show their face out here. But nevertheless, thank you so much for joining the Found Translation show. We're going to have a rolling guest, a rolling set of activists on the show. And we're going to start on the East Coast. Why not? So let's start with a great friend to the show. It's amazing it's taken him this long to be on the show. Progressive strategist, political campaign expert, Doug Chavez, calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. Doug, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, Ray. And I'm sorry it took so long, but thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be finally on.
It is great to hear from you. So, Doug, let's just start with, as a progressive, I think you're like a lot of people in the progressive community, of course, keenly interested in how this race impacts really all working people and people that usually are voiceless in our society, whether they're Latinos or immigrants or just poor folks that don't have a voice. And that, we've had a lot of Facebook conversations, a lot of Twitter chats around this dynamic. So as we're sitting here today, and we'll get into results, and we encourage people, keep it real. We're all just regular people trying to do this. So we're not at a major TV studio. So we encourage people on social media to post results from states that are rolling, because, we're kind of doing the show at the same time. But essentially, it appears that the Democratic establishment, Doug, is trying to take this candidacy back, because it looked like 4 or 5 days ago Sanders was in the driver's seat. So how are you feeling about the state of the race as of 9:50 Eastern time on Super Tuesday?
Well, I'm disappointed, but not completely surprised. You mentioned in your opening that Vice President Biden received the support of minor moderate candidates. They weren't minor. Mayor Pete won Iowa and almost won New Hampshire. And some have argued that Mayor Pete had been for that Iowa mess, and he would have gotten that real bump. And full disclosure, I'm not a Mayor Pete fan, but he didn't get that bump from Iowa. And then in New Hampshire, he supposedly didn't do as well. And Amy Klobuchar, who had that great debate performance from the pundit, supposedly propelled her to a strong third finish right behind Sanders and Mayor Pete. So with Mayor Pete, who won Iowa, and who would have thought that someone who won Iowa would already have dropped out by Super Tuesday? That's how crazy this season has been. Everyone counted out Vice President Biden. I know I didn't really give him much hope. I knew he was going to win South Carolina, but I was surprised by the margin. But you got to give credit to Representative Clyburn. But people are just scared, concerned. my concern is that moderates, the establishment, they just didn't learn their lesson from 2016. They want to play it safe. They want to go with Biden because he was Obama's vice president, and they have short-term memories. Biden has a long track record, and they're forgetting his poor track record. Someone posted on the other day on Facebook how Biden, it took him 32 years and 3 contests to finally win a presidential primary. And now, but in our day, this day and age with social media, everything just happens quickly. And I thought that him winning on Saturday big wouldn't propel him this much, but he's doing great. He's winning the South. He might even shock people here in Massachusetts. Seems like he has a strong lead in Massachusetts. He might finish first, and then Bernie and the Senator Warren will fight it out for second place. And to me, that would be a shocker.
That would be incredible. I mean, for
right now, I'm taking a look at it, and Biden has a strong lead in Massachusetts.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. I mean, Warren being your home senator, Bernie Sanders being a neighboring senator, has done so much work to cultivate, had a huge crowd in Boston Commons over the weekend. I mean, he really wanted Massachusetts because where he was going to get his margins was going to be really New England in the West Coast, and then sort of Texas being potentially the tiebreaker. He knew even best case scenario, the South would be, sort of Biden's the way. But Doug, before we get to another guest that you brought into the mix, Tanya, that I wanted to ask you that, there's sort of 2 emotions and passions that are dictating this race. There's the people that really believe that Senator Sanders is sort of like the option, the only option that's viable at this point, that really would push for not only structural change, but change that would incorporate our communities in a real way, in a real authentic prioritization way. And then the other side of it was whether you want to just say more moderate Democrats that were concerned about down ballot or concerned about viability of a more true progressive or an ideological candidate, or people that just were scared that, I think some people were scared that Bernie could actually win this thing and change the whole dynamic of Democratic and party politics in this country. So those seem to be the 2 passions, but what's missing in the passion there is Vice President Biden, because even today, when he's going to win, he's going to do very well. I don't hear a lot of people really excited about his candidacy. And to be honest with you, it almost feels like a 6 seed winning, getting to the NBA finals. It's like,
exactly. No one's excited about him. No one is excited about him. They're just trying to play it safe. And do people honestly believe that Biden is going to pull in, motivate young voters to come out? Because you're going to need young voters to come out in waves to beat Trump. Is Biden going to motivate those 2 million voters that stayed home last time? Is Biden going to motivate those left-wing supporters or Bernie supporters who were so upset at what happened last time that they voted for Jill Stein? And people may think that's not big, but if you look at Jill Stein's total votes in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, that was the difference of Hillary losing. So my concern is that Biden is just not going to excite people. It's just not going to get the vote out that we need. And I'm concerned. I'm extremely concerned and nervous. I think the Dem establishment is just, you're right, nervous about Bernie Sanders and the change. I honestly have heard from Democrats, corporate Democrats, who said, look, we'd rather bite the bullet, and this is straight white privilege, and have Trump another 4 years than have Bernie Sanders win.
Our producer, Elba Garcia, has reported here on social media for people listening to the podcast. We've got a sort of a rolling scroll of our social media commentary. Elba Garcia and our great friend Scarlett Pineda are saying AP's calling it Minnesota for Biden. This was a state that was polling for their home senator, Amy Klobuchar, till days ago. And Sanders was doing part of the reason some people were thinking that Sanders Klobuchar would stay in for Tuesday was to block Sanders from winning Minnesota today.
Exactly.
Joe Biden. So Klobuchar has brought all of her field strength to the table here. And this is just some really shocking developments. Great to see Vanessa, Scarlett, and Dr. Vibe and others, Otiniel, chiming in here. Great. You got some fans here, brother. People. Otiniel said that was a great point. Let's bring another friend to the show, Tanya Del Rio, into the conversation. Got to hear from the women who are the true leaders of our community.
Yeah.
Tanya
Good
is
evening.
awesome. Tanya is awesome.
I'm sure
She's a
My
true
greatest
leader.
qualification is that I'm Doug's friend.
Well, that's my one of my qualifications, so it's okay. Probably a little longer. Tanya, let people know how you're feeling. This is quite a historic night in politics.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of mixed feelings. I'm not happy, especially watching the way things are playing out in Massachusetts. It's really strange and confusing. One point that I wanted to really stress from what Doug say, well, from what Doug said, and just kind of frame it in a different way, is this idea of playing it safe. I think playing it safe really is a way of saying catering to Republicans. I really think that the Democrats that are scared are trying to figure out a way to become appealing to Republicans. And that is not the way to run a Democratic primary. I think a Democratic primary is the opportunity that we have to excite voters. And that's exactly what a candidate like Biden is not going to do, to Doug's point. So, I mean, let's call it what it is. Playing it safe is really, I'm scared of Republicans. Let's try to, at least pull some of them in. It's not going to happen.
But
They're
Tanya,
Republicans.
this is our dilemma, and this is what's going to get thrown back at us. Is that you're saying that, and you progressive minority activists are saying this, but it was African American voters that brought Biden back from the dead.
Correct.
So you're
a great
arguing,
point.
so is it that, and this could be part of the conversation, is it that African Americans are feeling concerned that they don't trust that moderate white voters or white voters, period, would pick the progressive option? So is it the relationship with Biden? Is it a concern? Is it this paranoia that we all have?
I don't think we should say that Black America is voting for Joe Biden. I think we should say that older Black America is voting for Joe Biden. And I totally understand, like they've only had like the unlimited, not up, not full of obstacles right to vote. And arguably they still don't have it for 50 plus years. So of course they're highly pragmatic, and of course they want to play it safe, especially if you're in the South. That's sometimes a scary place to be Black, especially if you're older. You've lived through busing, you've lived through like a number of things that are very scary. So I totally get it, and I think that we should listen to that experience and validate it. If you talk to younger Black Americans, though, that's not the narrative that I'm hearing. The narrative that I'm hearing is progressive, and we have to have empathy for that intergenerational difference in experience. But again, I think that playing it safe, or again catering to Republicans, is riskier than trying to excite your younger base. And then as far as the Latino community, I mean, I'm not seeing that same split, which I think is very interesting. I mean, we spoke in Nevada pretty clearly, and it looks like we have Texas is going to be an interesting place to look at too, and California tonight, to see whether the Latino community is feeling the burn, or if they're feeling like they want to play it safe. I feel like it's going to be the Latino community is feeling progressive.
Scarlett Pineda, great friend to the show, comments: moderate Americans don't want to go from one extreme to another extreme. Hence, they would rather go with Biden over Sanders. But what's so interesting about that is that none of that was reflecting in the polling till yesterday.
And
so
one more thing that I think is important.
They got scared Bernie would win. It's just very confusing.
Yeah, Ray, one thing that we should say too, I'm an Elizabeth Warren voter, full disclosure. I think for Warren voters specifically, that the lanes aren't as clear as the media likes to say, right? There's not the progressive and the moderate lane. I know very progressive people that went for Warren because they're feminists, because this or that, they like her plans, whatever it is. And I also know more conservative leaning people that went for Warren because they thought Bernie was too much, but they understood that there was an income and wealth inequality problem that she could try to solve. So they see that part of it. And so I'm just wondering where those voters are going to go. Is it a 50-50 split, or what is that split of Warren voters going to look like? Because I really think some are going to go to Biden, some are going to go to Bernie, and I just don't know the proportion.
Part of what we're trying to do here, and you're listening to Tanya Del Rio and Doug Chavez and others that you're going to be hearing throughout the show here on Found in Translation. We want to appreciate everyone not only watching, but commenting, contributing to the show in a lot of different ways. We encourage people to continue to share the live stream on social media, not only on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube Live. We actually have people that are watching YouTube Live, and we have people from coast to coast checking us out. One of the things we want to do by having a rolling set of guests on the show today is give people that live in other parts of the country a flavor of what's happening in these local communities. So throughout the show, we got people from Texas, California, and other areas. But we are starting on the East Coast. And Doug, I want to go to you because you've gotten very involved in Massachusetts politics over the last decade. So why don't you give people a flavor of kind of what was the political climate going into this election day in Massachusetts, and anything you'd like to share to give people a snapshot of what's the flavor of the Latino political climate in Massachusetts in 2020?
Well, it was a difficult situation because a lot of my friends that I respect, such as Tanya, were hardcore Elizabeth Warren supporters, and I'm a fan of the senator, and I really was hoping that she would do better than she did so far. So right now, I think everybody's confused. Like Tanya said, because Warren's not doing well, Bernie's not doing as well as we thought, and Biden's coming in. But it's the whole dynamic the ecosystem that exists in Massachusetts. It's different everywhere. So I guess I can't say I'm not too surprised that Biden is doing as well as he is, because outside of the greater Boston area, it's pretty conservative in Massachusetts. You have pockets of, that are liberal, but it's pretty conservative. Charlie Baker is a governor, Republican. We've had Republican governors for the last 30 years, except for Deval Patrick. So you have a lot of conservative Democrats and Republicans and independents. So I'm not too surprised, yet I'm still a little shocked that Biden's doing as well as he is. I know a lot of people were torn between EW and Bernie. There's a lot going back and forth. I've been biting my lip because I have a lot of friends who I support, who I respect, who are diehard Warren supporters. But I voted for Bernie today, just because I felt he had the most viable path to getting to 1991 delegates. And that's the key, 1991. Because if Bernie or Elizabeth or anyone doesn't get to 1991, as we all know, then it goes to the second ballot.
Then Bloomberg's bank account becomes a factor.
Yeah, so it's an interesting day in Massachusetts. It's an interesting day in Massachusetts. We've had some amazing historic races lately, local races, electing Congressman Ayanna Presley, District Attorney Rachel Rollins, State Rep Nicola Lugardo and Liz Miranda. Most recently, historic race, electing the first Latina and Julia Mejia for Boston City Council. So there's been a lot of support for progressive values to support women, and specifically women of color. So how that's translating today, we're going to have to sit down and dissect it and really look at it, because I think we're still soaking in these results.
Tanya, are you based in Massachusetts as well?
I am. I'm in Boston. I used to live very close to Doug. I still do.
Fantastic. Yeah, tell us about the flavor of the climate. Sure.
Yeah, I think that there's a feedback loop now between local politics and national politics that wasn't as strong, I don't think, before, because of social media, because of the media consolidation on TV, etc. There's a feedback loop. For example, Doug was talking about when Ayanna Presley was elected. I feel like she ran an excellent campaign, but also there was all this pent up energy. Like every single time Trump did something crazy, people started having all this pent up energy, and that was a good outlet for them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this election right now and in November, and how that has an effect in local politics for a year or two after that, which I think we saw. And that's why we have a majority, women city council in Boston with so many women of color, and why we have our first Black congresswoman. And I think that's an interesting feedback loop that I'm going to be watching in the next year.
Hold on. You're listening to Tanya Del Rio and Doug Chavez on the Found in Translation Talk Show. Just stay right there, folks. I just want to reset the table for everyone. Again, thank you for watching and listening to the Super Tuesday live edition of Found in Translation. For those newer to the experience, I'm your host, Ray Collazo. I'm by day the political director for a national Latino civil rights organization, and by night I'm Ray Collazo, the podcast guy. And we really try to bring not only my analysis from working and organizing and political affairs throughout the country for longer than I'd like to share publicly at this point. But also, and more importantly, and just as importantly, the perspective of people in the community, like Doug Chavez, like Tanya Del Rio, like other guests that you're going to see on the show momentarily, that really bring the perspective of what's happening in our communities. And, so much time, even people that I love and respect that you see on basic cable, whether they're elected officials, whether they're, political figures in the political journalists, they're caught up in that Acela sort of beltway mentality because that's their live, that's their lifestyle. And we try to, on the show, not only bring that perspective, what's happening on the beltway and on Capitol Hill, but also we have enough of a toe in the hood and enough of a toe engaging real people like Tanya and Doug that are doing the real hard work that often doesn't get celebrated in our communities and organizing day to day to really keep it real. And I just want to kind of reset the table here. As Doug said earlier, this is about getting over 1,900 delegates to get the majority of delegates so that we don't have any sort of broker convention or a process that's not purely relied upon in terms of, just people voting for their candidate of their choice for the Democratic primary. And there's over 1,300 delegates up for grabs today. And what you're going to see in the media is even if Biden has the best case scenario day, which it looks like he's going to have, including a potential winning in Massachusetts, Minnesota, potentially Texas, that will likely be largely neutralized or sort of pulled to a draw by the strong performance we anticipate Bernie Sanders having in California. Unfortunately, unless you're on the West Coast, you're probably not going to really kind of get that from the media coverage because A, it's going to get late, and B, because of California's very robust early voting and vote by mail process, we're not going to really have anything near like final results till, a few days from now. So a lot of the media angle is going to be Biden, which, largely is correct, especially in the early time zones. But I must say that it does feel a bit frustrating beyond just kind of this concept of, Democrats that are more connected to the corporate world or the Obama legacy or however you want to couch it, sort of supporting someone that, again, as I said in my social media post today, when I formally endorsed Senator Sanders for the nomination, I encourage people, even Warren supporters, and I got a lot of love for Warren. I, basically was a Warren supporter for a lot of this process because of what Doug Chavez just said, that, in terms of if you really want a progressive anti-establishment option, that was really the only option mathematically we have at this point. And I think Senator Warren's appears to be pretty poor performance across the board is an indication of that. But that, it is sobering and frustrating because regardless of the ideological piece, Vice President Biden's done very little to be the leader for this nomination. He has been a mediocre campaigner, a mediocre to bad debater, so message, mediocre communicator, poor fundraiser in comparison to someone like a Pete Buttigieg that was out raising him. He was the mayor of a small city in the Midwest. So, for this to be the person ultimately, and we understand the vice president and the Obama connection and the decades of service, he really, for most of the candidates, he really lapped the field in legislative history and experience in our country. But it does not feel, even someone that certainly doesn't hate Biden. I endorsed him when I was 14 years old in 1988. We're talking about history here. And as a Philadelphian, basically a local elected official of mine, I was a half hour away from the Delaware border as a child, that it does not feel quite satisfying and on some level fair that all of a sudden, we all turn our fingers. So I think we're trying to figure out why. Obviously, there's a concern around electability. Is the country ready for, a democratic socialist, quote unquote? But I want to take it more specifically as a Latino activist. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that if you look at how this is broken down, the progressives and the Latinos, or many of the Latinos, where the energy is with the Latino community, has sort of aligned itself with Sanders, and basically the moderates, now it appears, kind of the suburban white vote in urban, ex-urban America. But clearly, with taking the lead and really salvaging the campaign that's very strong, particularly Southern Black vote, are sort of pitted against each other from an electoral perspective. And the thing I'm concerned about, to be very honest with you, is where this leaves not only sort of progressives and people that normally don't feel heard in this process, but specifically Latinos, and specifically the cohort of younger Latinos in our community that are really showing the true leadership by really, in the results you're going to see in California, the results you saw in Nevada, some of the results we may see in Texas later, is really have shown the energy and been the people that have been most mobilized in our community through this process. And I spent a lot of time in the Southwest the last few weeks with Latinos, young people from Nevada, the San Antonio, the Valley of Texas, the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest. And, you got to think about it. They get it. They get the brunt of this administration from two perspectives. One, just being younger people in this country and younger workers, dealing with the stifling income inequality, the stifling student loan debt, and then coupling that with being a young Latino in this country, in that part of the country, and potentially being from a mixed status immigrant family, potentially being a dreamer, potentially not being documented yourself, or having relatives or older siblings that are on the front lines of this targeting whether it's domestic terrorists in El Paso or just the day-to-day microaggressions. Just think about all the junior high school young Latinas in the southwest part of the country get teased, bullied, harassed by classmates, harassed by authority figures, harassed at checkpoints 100 miles from the border. And so I have an open question to Vice President Biden at this point. It said, you seem to have gotten a second breath of life here. What are you going to do for those people? And are you really going to do something for real for the most vulnerable of society, whether it's the Latino community dealing with this anti-immigrant, anti-Latino fervor, and try to really deal with it from a policy perspective and get these ICE guys to stop harassing people off the books? Are you really going to do something really about Puerto Rico? Are you really going to do something about income inequality and disproportionately impacting younger Latino workforce in this country? So that's my question, and that's my concern. And again, it doesn't come from a malicia with him. Before y'all were into politics, as a young boy, I was down with Biden. So it's an open question. And because of the way this all went down, are we going to get left out? And that's the question I want to put to my panelists like Doug Chavez. Doug, do you share my concern, brother, that this emerging, the new America, the younger generation, obviously very diverse, very multicultural, very inclusive, care about the environment, care about the things we need to care about, is going to be left out of this discussion if indeed Vice President Biden pulls away from Sanders in the coming weeks?
Absolutely. I mean, I would hope that's not the case, but I share your concerns. And I think although the Latino vote is not, the Latino community, just like the Black community, it's not a monolithic group. I hate when people say the the Black community has come out strong for Biden. Yes, they have. But if you look at the states right now, the southern red conservative states, other than maybe Virginia. If you look at the states that Bernie is winning right now, Colorado, he's leading in Texas, he's leading in California. So he won in Nevada. It's a huge Latino vote. That's part of that. And a lot, again, not all Latinos, but a lot of the young Latinos are concerned about that. And they share the same concerns. That is Biden just returning to what we had before Trump? Is that good enough? I don't think a lot of us want just to be Trump. Yes, absolutely, the goal is to be Trump. But we also want real change, real drastic change. Like you said, what are you going to do for the immigration community? What are you going to do for Puerto Rico? We want change. And I think Bernie, if he stays in this race long enough, it's going to be on the back of young Latino voters.
Tanya, any thoughts about this? Again, do you share my concern?
Yeah, of course. I share it. And I'm very worried because I think that beating Trump is not, to answer Doug's question, not nearly enough. I think it's very clear that Trump is a symptom. He is a false solution to a real problem. I mean, people have been suffering for a number of years because of globalization, because of increasing wealth and income inequality, and because of our disastrous healthcare system and many, many other things. They're very upset. I believe Trump voters, especially the ones who were former Democrats and voted for Obama, wanted to break something. And then they thought maybe Trump would be able to do that. And again, he's a false solution to a real problem. So sure, if we remove Trump and go back to where we were before, we're not solving the problem, and we're just going to get another Trump or probably worse later. So yeah, I share the concern, and I don't think going back to what we had before is nearly enough.
Yeah, so Jesus Barron, who's based in Houston, Texas, I believe. What about all those Republicans that were supposed to come in and vote to wreak havoc, throw a wrench on the primary? Does this have an effect? Different states have different primaries. I think the majority of them are closed, but there are some states where Republicans and independents can vote in Democratic primary. That was discussed quite a bit with the South Carolina primary. And I think because of the large turnout of African Americans for Biden, I think whatever numbers that could have been those kind of like fake Democratic voters, I think, and they would have voted for Bernie anyway. So I think that maybe it was a little bit of a pylon, but there's no evidence that that was a big factor. Gabrielle,
And to speak of Massachusetts, independents could vote in either primary here. They could
Okay.
choose, and there is a higher amount of independents voting in the Democratic primary, obviously this year, than in the Republican, just because one's contested and exciting, and the other one is not so much. And I think it's got to be at least part of the reason Biden is doing so well in Massachusetts. Apparently, he's going to win here, which it blows my mind. But again, what Doug said is fair. I mean, the state is much more conservative than people tend to think.
Yeah, so Vanessa Maria Graber's comment is so detailed. I'm gonna have to read it because I can't put it on screen and we won't be able to see Tanya. So Vanessa Maria breaks down, who's the executive producer of the radio version of the show, breaks down 38 million people live in poverty, and about 20% of Black and Latino people live in poverty. Half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and yet it's considered extreme or radical to have a grassroots movement aimed to lift up the unjust. And by the way, 2.3 million people are locked up, and we know Black and Latinos are disproportionately profiled and arrested, often with sentences that are much higher than whites. Puerto Rico suffering under U.S. economic system. Vanessa, I think, I tell you, that's a whole conversation. Can we get that down there? So,
but let me pick out one thing that she's saying, because I love what Vanessa's saying. And
absolutely.
There's one point there about mass incarceration. I don't know if you've seen that documentary, The 13th, but it talks about how basically they've locked up as many Black people as possible. So now they're moving in and trying to bring in the immigration system and trying to lock, I guess, Latino mostly people through that. And there is a common issue and a common struggle that Latinos and African Americans have. And we, I think, as two communities that face similar struggles or some similar struggles, we have failed to kind of build those bridges and do activism around those issues together. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Latino activists and Black activists to work together on especially those issues that really hit us, especially mass incarceration and as it pertains to people in immigration and in criminal justice.
Well, that's going to be really important because it was interesting because you did have a cohort of obviously not only, sort of Latino grassroots, but Latino activists that supported Bernie Sanders. But we also had a fair amount of prominent African-American activists that not only supported Bernie Sanders, but Elizabeth Warren in this process. And so it's interesting that, I mean, let's keep it real. The Black community has not responded to those surrogates in this process. And you have to wonder, is it out of fear? Is it out of not connecting with sort of these ideological figures in our communities? It doesn't seem like Julian Castro, for example, is making a big impact, who's a party politician, part of the Obama administration, a big Warren in Texas. So, Doug, is it just that people are paying attention? They realize, Biden's Obama's guy, and it's kind of casual. I mean, the guy, it's amazing to me. The guy's winning states he didn't have offices in. He had no money, no commercials.
Nothing.
So poorly, and 3 good days of media and Obama's blessing quietly. That's enough for people. It's unbelievable to me.
Apparently, but again, I want to emphasize, look at the states that he's won. Southern red states. I would love to, would the conversation be different? Would the narrative be different if Michigan, Pennsylvania, other states, New York, with higher African-American populations, see how they did, how younger African-Americans voted. Michigan is a big African-American population. I'm eager to see how they vote.
Absolutely.
Which way they go. Bernie won that last time. We'll see what happens now. But because the narrative in the media is going to be, hey, Biden's winning the Black vote, which is mostly Southern, more conservative, more old school, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And with all respect to them, I'm not trying to take anything away from their experiences, but there is a generation divide. You can't deny that. And Now, will young people be discouraged and just not come out and vote? That's what I'm concerned. Is it a done deal? Oh, is Biden going to be it? You know, I'm hoping that young people don't get discouraged and still understand the importance of their vote.
And
So,
the other
And to
part of
add
this
to
is gonna,
that, to add to
yes,
that,
Tanya.
I don't think we understand the black vote yet in this election because of what Doug said. Only a few states have voted. Number two, the states, for some of the states that are white dominated, like let's say New Hampshire, Massachusetts, even Iowa, they do have populations of color. I don't think, or I haven't seen the data, if I don't think it's come out, of how the people of color in those states have voted. I'd be very interested to see that. And then the last thing I'd say is California and Texas tonight, at least, will give us something more to say, because we just don't know yet. And I agree, we can't say that the black vote is South Carolina or is North Carolina, because there are black people and Latinos in every state, and so
Well,
we
especially
just need to
Texas.
know a little more.
Yeah, which probably is a larger black community in all these states. Want to bring in another perspective on this conversation. And again, you're watching and listening to the Found Translation Talk Show, Super Tuesday edition, Super Tuesday edition, and with Tanya Del Rio, who is I'm trying to think of the equivalent, because it's almost like you're the Joel Embiid. You just sort of fell out of the metaphorical sky here, Tanya, and you're doing so well. Thank you so much. We're gonna bring in
Thank you.
another friend to the show, Doug. Stay there, please. You're still gonna be part of this conversation. Journalist, activist from Arizona, James Garcia. James, welcome back to Found in Translation.
Hey, how are you?
So, you didn't lose the memo. This is a shocking. Is the results tonight with Biden seemingly coming out of nowhere to be a dominant factor in the eastern states as shocking as it is to us out here, brother?
Yeah, I'm stunned. I'm just stunned. Not a commentary on Biden specifically, but I think just like the rest of the country, everyone took his campaign for dead 10 days ago, right? And here he is, and he's just come back to life, and it's just astounding to me.
James, can you share with us? We had this conversation, and I really want to get your perspective on it. And I think you and I have been, in the wee hours having these conversations offline. But I have a concern, and my concern with this process is that, quite honestly, and our very special guest is on, so we're going to bring. Actually, James, if you could just give us a second, we don't have too much time. We have a very special guest, and we're going to bring you back on the show.
I've heard someone special's coming. I'm going to hold. I'll wait.
Yeah,
no problem.
So, but you're very special to me, James. Don't worry about it. I talk to you all the time. This person's rare. So we have on the line, LB. If we could bring him up, we have a very special guest on the show. We're very happy to have not only a member of Congress, one of Senator Sanders' main surrogates, but one of the great champions for progressive values and people of color on this country, California Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna, can you hear me? Welcome. This is Ray Collazo on Found in Translation.
Ray, he just dropped, so we're going to get him back on. Sorry about that. Get him back on.
Sorry about that. Okay. So, all right, James, we'll have Congressman. We'll have the Congressman on in a second. And of course, Tanya and Doug, please stay on. You're going to be back on. You're going to be back on in a moment. So, James, we're having this concern. I mean, I guess the bottom line is, as a Latino activist, are you concerned that Vice President Biden sees, well, the formula's black voters in the South and enough suburban voters everywhere else, and I don't need to focus on Latino priorities going into the general?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's surprising about what's happening tonight is that we don't know exactly formulaically what's happening around the country right now, right? We do know, or we do have a strong sense that Congressman Clyburn's support opened up the floodgates in terms of black support, right? We have that sense.
James, let me. I'll be right there with you. We'll continue that conversation. Let me get the Congressman on.
Okay.
No All right. So let's get the Congressman Ro Khanna on the line. Elbert, I think you're muted. Congressman, this is Ray Collazo on Found in Translation. Thank you for joining us tonight. Unmute your mic, LB.
I can hear you.
Oh, Congressman, thank you. This is Ray Collazo, Found in Translation. Let us know how you're feeling about the results this evening so far. Congressman, can you hear us?
Well, I'm very encouraged that Senator Sanders is winning in Texas. He's doing very well in Colorado. He won there. He's doing well in Massachusetts, and I'm very confident he will win California. Now, obviously, Vice President Biden had a good night in the South. That was largely expected. But I expect after California, the delegates to be close to even, and this is going to be a race where Senator Sanders can draw contrast with Vice President Biden.
Okay, so in case LB, the congressman can't hear me, there's Ray Collazo. If you could pass along this message, Congressman, we're concerned that we have Latino activists primarily all over the country listening and watching to the show. And we're concerned that that this surge from Vice President Biden, primarily in the African American and sort of white moderate community, is gonna minimize the Latino perspective on this race. What are your thoughts, considering that Senator Sanders has cultivated the Latino vote as a key part of his strategy?
Proud of. Let's just be clear. I mean, the reason Senator Sanders won Nevada is because of the Latino community. The reason he's winning Texas is because of the Latino community. The reason he's going to win my home state, if California, is because of the Latino community. He has outlined a vision for education, public policy. The real issues of the Latinx community. So I believe this is the workers calling the nation, and we have a long way to go. But he is in a very strong position in that support.
No question about it. And you're listening to Congressman Ro Khanna, from California, is representing California's 17th congressional district, a great champion for the Latino community and really all working people, and a Sanders surrogate, of course, a key part of the campaign. We really appreciate you, Congressman, joining us on Found in Translation Talk Show. Congressman, how will the Sanders campaign expand the coalition? Obviously, there's a very strong, and we've known this from the beginning, a very strong floor. Nobody has more fervent, passionate supporters. We've chronicled that extensively on the Found in Translation show with your supporters from coast to coast. But how will people that are watching this that are very concerned about the results on the East Coast, how will Senator Sanders and your the campaign expand the coalition he currently has?
Well, we're really strong. He's strong the Latino community. He's strong working class, the PI community. He's strong with the young. He continue to do work and outreach to the African American community. There's no doubt that we need to do better there. We have to redouble our efforts. We have to do better in suburban districts. There's no doubt we need to redouble our efforts in both suburban counties and in the African American community. And we'll do that by offering a clear contrast with Vice President Biden. I mean, Bernie is going to make the case of why he's better to win voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and I think when it's a two-person contrast will be easier.
No question about it. And Congressman, final question for you. We really appreciate it. We know you're on the road in California. Obviously, I think you're still voting there technically. We really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate it. I know you're
very busy Super Tuesday, but my last question to you is, for those that maybe
so many in the nation, and I appreciate that.
No, thank you. And really quickly, the final question is: you're gonna have a lot of people that were Senator Warren supporters, and most likely that this is becoming clearly a two-person race, or people that have just not voted yet and are not sure of should they sort of go with this safer wave, or go with someone that maybe attracts them in their values and are intrigued by Senator Sanders' candidacy. What's your message for people that are going to be voting in Arizona and Florida and the states in the coming weeks?
I say that Senator Warren herself has said that her policies are very similar to Bernie Sanders. She's for Medicare for all, as is Bernie Sanders. She's for forgiving student debt, as is Bernie Sanders. She's for free public college, as is Bernie Sanders. She's for decriminalizing the border when it comes to mothers or fathers who come here with young kids. That is Bernie Sanders' policy. They both called for a moratorium on deportations when it comes to ordinary families who have simply come here without documentation. They both believe that the working class needs a $15 minimum wage. So I would just say we welcome, in the contrast between Biden, we welcome people who share our progressive values.
Thank you. You've been listening and watching Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents the 17th Congressional District in California. Congressman, again, thank you so much for your leadership, not only as part of the Senator Sanders campaign, but your leadership in elevating progressive issues.
I represent Silicon Valley. I'm a co-chair for Bernie Sanders, and folks can follow me at Ro Khanna on Twitter.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman. You just watched and listened to Congressman Ro Khanna. That was very exciting. I want to bring James Garcia on the show here. James, I mean,
I've been on the show 3 times,
brother. We're getting Congressman on the road. What's your thoughts about Congressman Khanna? Of course, a very critical surrogate for the Sanders campaign. His, trying to put an optimistic spin on a tough few hours for sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let me just start by being right up front that I really like Bernie Sanders. I think he means everything that comes out of his mouth. And that's incredibly refreshing after 3 years of someone who doesn't mean anything at all that comes out of his mouth. And so at the very minimum, I get and I understand exactly why he has built such strong support in the Latino community. And of course, it's not just his frankness and his authenticity and et cetera, but it's also about the legwork and the groundwork that he's done for the last 4 years, really. I mean, he's probably really been working diligently in that regard. And he has a lot of great people that are part of his campaign that are doing that work up front. They've come to Arizona. I've met them in different places in the country. And so he's doing well with Latinos for very good reason. Now, this dynamic of what's happening with Biden gets into all of the other issues that you've already had some discussions about tonight. For me, I think what's really fascinating is that we're really, and this is not an overstatement, we're in an election year in which I really sincerely believe that the nation is being awakened to the role that we are playing as Latino voters all over the country. And it isn't the traditional role because it does involve now a whole new generation of very young Latinos, many of whom are following Bernie, but it also still includes a lot of the establishment folks, some of whom may be, as we speak, across the country, be part of that strength that Biden is showing. Right. I want to get
Tanya.
I want to make this one last point. One last point is that I think that is good for our community. That these two, they may end up being the titans, if you will, at the end of a candidate, or rather a campaign that's seen 24 Democratic candidates. These may be the only 2 or 3 people left, and I think that it's good that they're competing for the Latino vote. So that's I think that's a good thing for our community in general.
Well, think about how far we've come, James. We got a congressman coming on Found in Translation to discuss these issues with our community. Tanya, what were your thoughts about Congressman Ro Khanna, his comments about Bernie's plight at this point this evening?
Yeah, no, I agree with him. And we're going to need voices like his and voices like, everybody that's been on this show to rally everybody around the person with the policies that we need the most. And I think that having a voice like that is important, and we need more of those.
Question about it, and let's get Doug back on the show. Doug, Congressman Khanna put a positive spin on it, but he did make some good points that maybe when it is a one-on-one battle, I think about it that there will be twists and turns, right? Because now Biden will have to debate Sanders soon one-on-one, and there'll be other races, there'll be other opportunities. And Biden's going to have to step it up because it's almost like what happened to Bloomberg. Well, when you're not paying that much attention and there's some ads and you heard a couple of buzz things, sound great. And Bloomberg died very quickly. The same could happen with Biden potentially.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to be interesting. I just hope we get to that one-on-one at some point soon, because there's still officially 5 candidates running. So we'll see. We'll see how the results. I wish we would know California sooner than later. I wish we would know it sooner, but unfortunately, we'll see how Texas pans out. But clearly, Vice President Biden is going to be in the delegate lead. He's going to have momentum behind him, but there's still a lot of delegates left. Of course, Congressman Connor's going to have to put a positive spin on it. But Bernie's in trouble. Let's be real. Bernie's in trouble, and we're going to have to really get behind him, push behind him. And it's not impossible, but he's got an uphill battle because he needs to get to 1991. There's no way that he's going to win on a second ballot. So if he doesn't get to 1991,
that's really your concern. So let me ask you a question. If that was the concern, and before we get to our next guest out of Texas, Michelle Tremillo. Michelle, you're in the queue there. We're going to get you on in a second. Doug, you're really concerned about that. So what you know your local senator there. What does Elizabeth Warren do right now? Does she drop out tomorrow? And how strongly? Because I said it 3 weeks ago on the show, Doug. I know you watching every week.
Yeah,
I thought the key was going to be if and when Warren made the kingmaker, and not only supporting Sanders, but it really feeling like an authentic partnership. That could be the key to this whole thing.
I agree, and it's going to be after Senator Warren. I can't speak for them. Maybe Tanya can speak. I don't know. I don't want to put Tanya on the spot, but I know she has a lot of powerful surrogates like Congressman Ayanna Presley, and a lot of people behind Senator Warren. So I'm not sure how long they're going to – I just don't see, with all due respect to Senator Warren, it doesn't look like she's going to pull out any state tonight, not a single one. She's going to get a few delegates because she's going to meet the 15% threshold in some states, which, by the way, I hate those rules. The 15% threshold, she's going to get awarded a few delegates here or there. But in the end, how many – I mean, I don't know how much of a path they're going to see, or they're just going to continue staying in and hope for a broker convention. I hate to say this. I don't want to be that person that's believing in these conspiracies, but I have a lot of friends who believe that EW is really not a supporter of Bernie. I hope that's the case.
We're going to see. So we want to – Texas is really going to be kind of the key to this whole evening in terms of the narrative.
Yeah.
And someone
Texas.
Absolutely. So let's just get him on you talk about Texas. She's going to take care of business. Calling in you're in San Antonio this evening, right, Michelle?
No, I'm in Houston.
Oh, wonderful. Even better. From Houston, Texas, the president, the executive director of the Texas Organizing Project, Michelle Tremillo. Michelle, welcome to Found in Translation.
Thank you so much for having me, Ray.
So Michelle, tell us what's happening in Texas tonight. Give people a flavor of what's happening in the communities you're working with, engaging Black and Latino voters throughout the state of Texas.
Yeah, well, so we have our organization, Texas Organizing Project, has reached out to about 195,000 predominantly Black and Latino voters across the state in our the three of the largest counties: Harris County, where Houston is, Dallas County, and then Bexar County, where my hometown is, San Antonio. And, you know, we've been talking to a lot of voters who are excited to cast a ballot for the first time in a Democratic primary. And, you know, if you're watching the results come in, Senator Sanders is currently in the lead in Texas. Our organization endorsed him, so we're pretty excited about that. We're watching very closely a congressional race, Congressional District 28. Jessica Cisneros, a 26-year-old immigration attorney, is.
Michelle, can you hear us? Can anyone hear Michelle?
Often with President Trump than he does with his own party. And right now she is down about 870 votes across that district.
Really? Do we have any numbers for the Senate race, Michelle? I was following that race close. We got a lot of love for Zune on here, but I don't know what
we are. You know, we're sort of watching the results on a few different websites. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to tell you from one website, which is actually, you know, a local news channel in San Antonio. It looks like MJ Hagar is who was, you know, tapped by the party nationally to run. She's at 27%. And then Cristina Sunsun Ramirez, who has been a colleague of mine in the progressive movement for many years. She is second with 14% of the votes, and that is 15% of precincts reporting.
And
So
that
we
would be
still have a long
the
way
top
to
two
go.
will end up in a runoff, correct, Michelle? The top two will be in a runoff?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. All right. So that's going to be very interesting. Michelle, there's a lot of people. One of the things you learn when you do this work nationally is people don't know really anything about Texas. So can you share with us, talk about the Texas that introduce your colleague there, and tell us a little bit about the communities you work in, because we can talk about numbers. We can talk about these elite figures that one will finish first or second. But what's more important are the people and the issues that the people that you're organizing. So tell us about the Texas that that the people around the country watching and listening to Found Translation should know about and support.
So let me introduce my colleague, Brianna Brown. She's the Deputy Director of Texas Organizing Project based in Dallas County. We're both here in Houston tonight for the election. And, did we lose you? Or did you just do something with the screen?
We're just
Ray?
giving you the floor, my friend. We're here. Don't worry about it. This is like TV. We're here, Mom.
All right, you're
Take
just
the floor.
letting
I'm
us-
getting out of your way to introduce Brianna. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Did you hear me? I did it. Okay. So Brianna Brown, Deputy Director of Texas Organizing Project. You want to start answering the question?
Sure. I actually thought that the way you laid it out was pretty consistent with with the Texas that we know. I mean, both Michelle and I are daughters of this state. We're fourth generation Texans. Our people have been here for a very long time, have been on the margins for a very long time, right? A lot of times we like to think about, or it might be helpful to think about what the politics of the state as what happens at the state level is really like apartheid politics, right? You have a minority that's like reigning over the state that's not reflective of what's going on in our cities and our counties. In our cities and our counties, where we organize in the three largest counties in Texas, in Bexar, in Harris, and Dallas, and consistently people are going to the polls and electing folks that share their values, and those values are rooted in the idea of everybody, right? Like very inclusive politics. So we're fighting for not just nibbling at the edges kind of reform, but real structural reform. Our members this year endorsed Bernie Sanders, and I think that's because he starts with a big vision, right, of what change looks like, and we know we need structural change in order to transform this state into a state that makes sure that everyone has access to healthcare as a basic human right. Make sure that despite what zip code you live in, you are able to go to a good school, that you can live and thrive in a neighborhood that has houses and sidewalks and trees, right? That you can, if you have to interact with a criminal legal system, it's one that sees us as human first, and not just poor, not Black, not Latino, but really is about justice. So, I don't know, when I think about Texas, I think about Michelle here, I think about my grandmother, my aunts, that have been, in this state, making us who we are. And our work is fundamentally about making sure that our representation not just looks like us, but shares our values.
And you're listening to Michelle Tremillo, and I'm sorry, your colleague there, is it Brianna?
It is
Brianna Brown.
Brianna, thank you so much. One of the things, and this is going to be potentially a subtext of how we move forward. It's going to be part of the ongoing discussion. And you all are really in the nexus and are really proving, we talked earlier on the show around how one of our concerns as a leadership community on the show is that we don't want this, depending on how the votes tally up, and that we don't want this primary to become kind of the dialogue of, Black people in the South versus Latinos in the West trying to get to fight for their candidate. So tell us a little bit about the work you do to really organize Blacks and Latinos in a way that's authentic and unifying in Texas, because that's the kind of strategies and the kind of effort that we're going to need to mobilize ourselves around the country moving forward.
I mean, this is, it's hard. We do this every day. It's kind of hard to answer in, 90 seconds. I mean, I think, it's very important. First of all, relationships are key to the work that we're doing, right? So actually building relationships, between the Black community and the Latino community, and really coming together to see that we share, common values, that we share common hopes and dreams for our families, and that the systems of oppression that hold us back are they are no different, right? That we really are, when we talk about ending mass incarceration, we're not just talking about, the predominantly Black men who are incarcerated in this country, but we're also talking about the same private for-profit corporations that are, benefiting from deportations in this country, right? And so, really, I think focusing on, there's a saying in Texas, y'all means all, right? Which is that, like, if we want healthcare for everybody, we really mean for everybody. And that means us working together to make that happen.
Michelle, I want to bring Arizona-based journalist and someone that knows a lot about Texas, James Garcia from Vanguardia America, onto the show. James, do you have a question for Brianna and Michelle from the Texas Organizing Project?
Yeah, I guess, and just so that Michelle and Brianna know, I was actually in Texas for about 13 years before I came out here, and my family's from Laredo, so I do have contacts and connections there. And I worked in San Antonio for the San Antonio Current for a little while. I guess if there's a question, it's how do we, in terms of the work that you've already done on the ground, right, and how do we just get sort of the word across the country about the common challenges that our communities face? How do we just do a more effective job of that in general? Because it does seem clear that that's been a focus of not just your organization, but to some degree certainly the Sanders campaign. Although the numbers are kind of playing out in this way that they're playing out tonight, so somewhere there's some disconnect, right? And what is it that people around the country should hear in terms of the kinds of efforts that you've made to deliver that message that there are commonalities?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because for a while, I was doing a lot of work around immigration in Dallas, and that was I was pitching because our immigration organizer who is Latino left, right? And I remember whenever I would sit around those tables, I would talk with membership about what brings me to that table is that, my family participated on my dad's side in the greatest migration that's ever happened in this country. And that's when 6 million Black folks left the Jane Crow South and headed anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
His family went to Chicago and Salt Lake and Los Angeles for the same reasons, right? Because there was no opportunity. And there was a kind of racist caste system that allowed for Black folks' dreams to be pretty small, right? It was just about trying to make it to the next day. And I get it, that idea, like I said, and there's 6 million Black folks that have that history, right? There's 6 million Black folks who probably trace some sort of ancestor of theirs back to the South. And it's, for, again, a very fundamental idea. It's about family and wanting to dream big for your kid. So I think that we have to be really good storytellers and really engage in the process of telling our stories. Be curious about our histories. I grew up, my dad told me more times than maybe I'd care to about, being a sharecropper, working from can to cane in the fields, and that journey that he took on the railroad, headed to Chicago.
And what a shared journey, our agricultural connections, right? The cowboys, the Blacks and Latinos were the real cowboys, right? Talking about that Southwest history. Michelle Tremillo, Brianna from Texas Organizing Project. Michelle, what else would you like us to know? Obviously, we won't know the results for a little longer, but obviously it's going to be a long night in Texas for not only the presidential, but for many of the other races we're following closely. What else would you like people to know about the work you're doing with the Texas Organizing Project in the communities that you all organize in every day?
Just one thing. I think considering that it's Super Tuesday and we're here to talk about an election, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that the Texas electorate is changing. There is a progressive movement alive and well in this state. We, along with several partners, labor unions, other community groups across the state, have been for 10 years working together to grow the electorate among Black and Latino voters. People of color were the majority of voters in early vote in this primary. We were 51.9% of all the votes cast in the Democratic primary, up from 39% in 2016. So Texas is changing. You can no longer write us off, and we'll be critical in delivering a big win for Bernie Sanders this evening, and we'll be critical in the fall. So watch out.
We will see. Well, let me tell you something. I know that Texas, in those communities, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, are in good hands because Michelle, you and your team are tremendous folks. You know how much we support you and the good energy we always try to share with you. And please keep us posted. I keep telling Michelle, Top needs their own podcast. So start breaking this down for us.
I've said the same.
Right? So you and I need to talk offline. We'll just have Michelle. We'll just blindfold her and walk her to the studio once a week. So Michelle Tremillo and your team, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
Texas, and siga adelante and keep getting those voters out. And that was Michelle Tremillo and Brianna from Texas Organizing Project. We're going to keep the Texas theme going. We have an elected official who is also a surrogate for Vice President Biden, who's joined us today, State House member Victoria Nieves, State Representative. Welcome to Found in Translation.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you're in North Texas. Give people the vibe. Tell people, give us a sense of how the vibe is here as you have a very competitive election unfolding in Texas this evening.
Yes, we're so excited about all of the energy that we're seeing, increase and surge in voter turnout in Dallas County and all across North Texas, especially in our swing areas where we have the potential to flip the Texas House. So we're very, very excited about that, excited about the numbers that we're seeing in Texas.
So House District member Victoria Nieves on Found in Translation from North Texas. Chiquita pero picosa, that is on your Twitter profile. So that is not something I'm making up. You're very proud of your Latina heritage. And tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in the Texas State Legislature. We, us Northerners think about Texas as very, very challenging political terrain for the Latino community in Texas. But I know your caucus is really pushing the agenda for our community in Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas is the biggest battleground state. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. My dad came to our country sin papeles, and he came with a dream and, wanted to fight for our community. What he told me, he's like, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is, he said, but don't forget where you came from. And so I keep that very close to my heart, especially as we have these battles in the Texas House, the Texas legislature, where Republicans have been just blatantly filing legislation that is discriminatory against our Latino community, like Senate Bill 4, which we fought against in 2017, my first legislative session. So we're fighting for lots of things. I do a lot of work on domestic violence and addressing the rape kit backlog. I passed some really historic legislation called the Lavinia Masters Act, which is coupled with an unprecedented $50 million in our Texas budget to end the backlog of thousands of untested rape kits in Texas. So we're doing a lot of the work on the ground and trying to continue to get the word out that Democrats are fighting for issues that our community cares about so that we can win in November and defeat Donald Trump.
No, absolutely. And Representative, it's very interesting because a lot of the media narrative over the last leading up to really the South Carolina primary was how there was this sort of new wave of newer Latino voters to the process that were engaged in Senator Sanders' campaign. You recently have come out publicly to support Vice President Biden. Can you share the thought process you had in making that announcement? And what's your message to the Latinos that are watching this program all over the country, listening all over the country, around why you believe Vice President Biden is the best choice for the Latino community?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are the first two Latina congresswomen from Texas, Congresswomen Sylvia Garcia and Congresswoman Veronica Escobar have also supported. We have Latina and Latino electeds all across Texas who have adore Joe Biden and believe that he is our best chance to take the Texas House and to defeat Donald Trump, especially when there is so much at stake. When I was elected to the House, we were one of the very few seats that flipped in Texas. In 2016, I represent a swing district where we worked across the aisle, and I'm very proud that as a Democrat, we had lots of independent and Republican supporters. My first session, there were 55 Democrats to 95 Republicans. So I've been in a Texas House where we were completely outnumbered, where Republicans had a near supermajority, and we were fighting against terrible legislation like the bathroom bill, which discriminated against our transgender community, as well as Senate Bill 4, which targeted our Latino population, which was like a show me your papers legislation. As Latino voters increased in numbers, as suburban voters increased in number in 2018, we gained an additional 12 seats, and that completely changed the balance of power in the Texas House, to where we had 67 Democrats to 83 Republicans. We have the potential, if we pick up an additional 9 seats, to flip the Texas House for the first time in 20 years. These 9 seats are situated all in suburban districts all across Texas. Many of them are concentrated here. Districts very similar to mine, where you have to work across the aisle. We earn a lot of support from voters, independent and Republicans as well. And I think that Joe Biden is the best positioned to attract that type of electorate as well.
And I would argue that, besides obviously the presidential, which was really about the future of our democracy, frankly, I would argue that those Texas state legislative races you're talking about, House District Member Nieve on Found in Translation, are the most important races for the Latino community across the country. A quarter of the Latino community lives in the state of Texas, and we really have lived from a policy perspective in almost an apartheid state for a generation. And flipping those seats and creating some balance and some power with redistricting coming up post-census, post the November elections is critically important.
That's exactly key. Yes, because if we don't flip the House right now in 2020 and 2021, and Republicans already have control of the Senate, they are in the governorship, of Democrats, we have to flip the House in order to control the redistricting in 2021, which we will draw the lines for Congress, for the state Senate, for the state legislature. And there is so much at stake. That's why the chair of a Mexican American Legislative Caucus, the largest and oldest caucus in the entire country of Latino legislators, Rafael Anchia, is also backing Biden. There are a lot of us that are backing him because we know what's at stake and the fights that we're going to have in 2021 is we're fighting for our community.
Representative Nieve, we have journalist James Garcia joining us today that has a question for you on Found in Translation.
Hi, James.
Representative, hello. So 2 quick questions. One, as a surrogate, obviously, for Vice President.
I can't hear.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can't hear.
This is let me speak up a little. Does that help? Can you hear me now?
I apologize. I just see your lips moving and I can't hear anything.
Okay. I don't know if maybe there's a technical issue.
Give me a quick summary of it and I can ask her. Representative, you can hear me, correct?
As a surrogate for the Vice President.
I apologize, gentlemen. I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now, Representative? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, so let me put her off for a second. And maybe sometimes you bring them back and forth, you can get them on the show. So, Representative, can you hear us now? Can you hear us now, Representative? Can you hear us? Okay. So we're going to put her off the Albert, if you could just let her know to lock back in and out, that usually works, okay? So we would like to get an opportunity for State Representative Victoria Nieve, who represents the Dallas area, to finish her comments. She is a surrogate and has endorsed Vice President Biden over the weekend, and she's placed a bet on someone that wow, it turns out that Biden won Massachusetts. Wow. Doug, what happened in Massachusetts, my man? Unbelievable.
It's I'm at a loss of words. I mean, he didn't even really have an operation here. I just think that, like I said, the state is 56% registered independent. There are more independent registered voters than Democrats. There's only about 36%, and the rest are Republican. So there are more independent voters than Republicans and Democrats. And I know everyone thinks Massachusetts is this progressive blue state, but it's not as progressive as people think.
Doug,
So-
you're going to be right back on. We have the representative here.
Sure.
We'll be right back on, brother. So, Representative, can you hear us now? Representative, can you hear us?
I see lips moving, and I.
Well, it happened.
Can you hear me,
log out and log
Representative?
back in, or?
Can you hear me? Nope, she
Yeah.
still can't hear us.
Yeah, I would just give it one more shot, Representative, if you could, okay? Let me see if we can kick her out here. Kick from the studio. Yeah. So it happens. So James, what are your thoughts listening to State Representative Victoria Nieve?
Two things.
Her thoughts around on the state of the race.
Yeah, and you can hear me, right? Ray?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, two things. I was really fascinated by her discussion about trying to flip the House there, right? And Arizona is in exactly the same place, right? This is a state that's been trending more and more purplish and away from its traditional red roots. And I think we're 2 seats away from flipping the House, 2 or 3.
Arizona State Senate's very important this year. My friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, in the House of Representatives here, and then the state Senate is a possibility, right?
Oh,
It's still a possibility. But so I think, so I think that there's a correlation between the shift that's been occurring in terms of Texas politics and what's been happening in Arizona, and we faced a lot of the same challenges in recent years.
Let's give the representative one more shot. Hopefully 3 times will be the charm. Let's see if she can get on here. Representative, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So we really appreciate. We know you got a lot going on with the campaign trail, but just really quickly, I mean, we have a lot of people watching this that feel like the vice president, just to be honest, has kind of run sort of a pretty mediocre campaign until the last several days, and now we're expected to really kind of connect with him, and a lot of people either have not been paying as close attention to his candidacy or haven't voted yet. What's your message to Latinos around the country around why they should give not only their support, but at least a second look to Vice President Biden?
Joe Biden has been fighting for our community for decades. He's been in the trenches. He authored the Violence Against Women Act, which for me is super important, and for women in Texas is especially important, especially as we're in this Me Too movement. He's also made lots of commitments. He has stood up to the NRA in terms of right here in Texas. We know that we've had multiple mass shootings in the last few years alone, and we have a governor who refuses to call a special session. He's beat the NRA twice. He has a plan for climate change. He wants to decriminalize cannabis. He wants to end private prisons. He wants to create systematic change that we absolutely need, and is fighting for a lot of these issues that will benefit our community. And so I say give him an opportunity to hear out his plan, listen to the things that he's going to be fighting for. And so, we'll see what happens tonight. But I think in the end, our goal, regardless of who folks vote for, is to defeat Donald Trump. And we're just excited to see, regardless of who folks vote for, the increase in voter turnout here in Texas.
Well, Representative Victoria Nieve represents the Dallas Mesquite area, the co-founder of the Dallas Women's March. So we appreciate your leadership. We really appreciate you and your team joining us and sharing with our leadership group around the country on Found in Translation. This is one of the very few national talk shows we have to have these conversations amongst the Latino leadership in our community. So promise us you'll come back, because we are very engaged in Texas state politics here on the show, and the Medicaid gap alone, if we could get that changed in the next session, would literally ensure hundreds of thousands of Latinos, including Latino children that currently don't have health insurance. And there's a myriad of issues we look forward to working with you with in Texas politics moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And that was State Representative Victoria Nieve, who represents the Dallas area, a Biden surrogate. Let's bring the whole crew back as we wrap up the show. I miss you, Tanya. There was too many guys there for a while. So thank you, Tanya, for coming back. So, wow, this has been quite a show. We've had people from coast to coast. Of course, Congressman Ro Khanna. Sanders is winning California. It looks good to me. It's all about the margins, and we won't know that for several days. So let's start with you, Tanya. So you've been so patient. Tanya, we've heard from Sanders surrogates, Sanders supporters, Biden surrogates. What's your thoughts as we wrap up this edition of Found in Translation, Tanya? Can't hear me. Can you hear me, James?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Oh,
Doug,
I can hear
you
you
hear
now.
me?
Yeah, she
Okay,
can hear
Tanya.
you. She
What
should
are
go.
your thoughts? You've heard a lot of interesting conversation over the last few guests around,
Oh,
Sanders,
only hear
Biden.
things.
What are your thoughts as we wrap up the show? What are you thinking?
We lost you. We lost her.
Oh, we lost her. Are you hearing me, Tanya?
I hear Is that yes? I
James, you hearing
hear
James?
James.
All right,
Also-
well, pass along the message.
Yeah,
So
I-
Ray is just asking if you have some thoughts after listening to all those speakers, if you want to kind of just wrap up your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing on the whole thing I keep hearing from Biden supporters about why, defeating Trump is the most important thing we could ever achieve. I question that the fact that he would be that most electable person or the most equipped to defeat Trump. He had to run in Delaware multiple times. He's run for president 3 times, and he's shown that he will lose multiple times. So I don't understand why some people are buying that argument that he's the one to defeat Trump. I question that. I don't share that feeling, and I of course will vote for whoever the Democrats nominate. But I question that. I also found the Texas state Congress discussion very interesting, which was great, and it is interesting to see how these national races play out locally, because there are so many echoes.
So I do want to kind of sum up, because there was a lot going on there. So for people not familiar with Texas, there's a lot going on tonight, and the state piece, which I do want to share with people. So we have a Senate race. So John Cornyn, who's one of the typical Southern right-wing Republican senators, the person that's going to run against him on the Democratic side, that primary is tonight. There's a lot of candidates. Cressida Zinzun Ramirez is an activist, could be tying his sister. There actually is a physical resemblance. That if she gets in the top 2, which it appears like she will tonight, she'll be in a runoff with the moderate white alternative in a few months. That's something that we all got to go to Texas for that one, fam. That's very important. She's a very dynamic, young progressive activist.
Brilliant.
She's fantastic. And then the other there's a lot of dynamics. There's a House race that they got into, but basically that Texas, along with Florida, the 2 big states, there's many of them around the country, but the 2 big states that their Republican governors never took the federal money to close the Medicaid gap in Obamacare. So there's literally hundreds of thousands of people, mostly Black and Latino, in Florida and Texas that don't have health care just because their Republican governor is refusing to give it to them. So those are the kind of things that are on the line in our community, particularly in those southern states. And that's what some of the issues that the representative was discussing. Doug, you heard from Ro Khanna, which was really cool, obviously, and some activists that were real pro-Sanders in the neighborhood there in Houston, Texas. And, of course, Representative Nieve, who's a Biden supporter. Your thoughts listening to the conversation with our friends around the country?
I thought it was awesome. I love hearing from different perspectives, even if I don't agree with them. But hearing from my fellow Latino activists and colleagues, it's awesome. In the end, we got to unite. I was just hoping that we would unite behind a progressive. So I am concerned. I'm nervous. We'll see what happens. I heard Bernie's doing really well in California. Yeah. I think they might have even called it for him.
Yeah, they called. Obviously, the question is going to be the margin and who makes that 15% threshold and all that stuff. Does anyone have any updated Texas numbers that they could put in the chat? Because I'm not in front of a TV. So Texas.
Last I checked, Bernie was up Texas, but by 5 points.
Wow.
He was up 28-23.
A lot can happen, that's for sure. James, your thoughts listening to Congressman Khanna and the rest of our activists. It was great to hear from our folks in Houston. That was a lot of rich conversations we had this last hour.
Yeah, I guess final thought I have is that I think that first, this whole idea that Bernie can't win, I think is ridiculous. I do believe that Bernie can win in the general election, but I also think that there is some legitimacy to the idea that some of the down ballot folks may not be helped by having Bernie at the top of the ticket. That there are some people who are in districts that are so-called swing districts, extra, centrist, moderates, whatever you want to call them, who had to struggle to win their races. And I think that's a big concern for a lot of the folks who are backing Joe Biden. And I think that they are maybe overlooking some of the weaknesses that Vice President Biden has because of that sort of mantra that the down ballot candidates could be hurt by having Bernie at the top.
Well, I want to first of all, wow, that race is very close there in Texas. We're going to be watching in the wee hours.
Yeah.
I want to thank all
I just wanted to chime in one
Please.
last time because as a former resident of Utah, Sanders just won there. So
there you go.
That's Utah.
I want to give a shout out to State Senator Luz Escamilla, who is not only the highest ranking Latina in the state, she's the only Latina in the state Senate, but she just ran for mayor of Salt Lake City. She lost a close one. So, but Luz is a progressive single mother who's also a Mormon. So she got a lot going on, and she fights the good fight out there. So we do have a good community there. So it's good to see. And Bernie put a lot of organizing into Utah. He put a lot of organizing efforts out there. So that makes a lot of sense. So, Doug, what do you think as we wrap this up, brother? I'm nervous as well, but the bottom line is I want to get your thoughts on this. Is the reality is that Bernie's coalition plus Biden's, or Biden's coalition plus Bernie's, we need both either way to win this thing. So the question is, how are we going to coalesce one way or another? Because it could work the other way if Bernie wins, and there's a whole lot of suburban women and older Black people that aren't going to feel comfortable with him.
Absolutely. I mean, we all have to, in the end, unite and vote for the Democratic candidate. I will vote for Biden if he is the nominee. I won't be excited about it, but ultimately we have to unite. We have to get behind that candidate. I just hope that it's a done deal by the convention, because I'm scared of a brokered convention. I think that can fracture the party. I think that will really divide the party, and not only will it cause us to lose, and as James is saying, down ballot. Although I feel about the down ballot, just one point, I don't feel people vote just straight down anymore. I really think people vote each race and look carefully. I give a lot more. I'm a lot more confident in the voter that they're not just gonna be scared by Bernie and then not vote Democrat. So I don't buy that argument personally, but we'll see.
We'll see. I want to thank Congressman Ro Khanna, Texas State Representative Victoria Nieve, Michelle Tremillo, her colleague Brianna from the Texas Organizing Project, and all of our friends on social media. Of course, our producer Albert Garcia, and all of you, Tanya, Doug, and James, for joining this special Super Tuesday edition of Found in Translation. Particularly Tanya and Doug, you were with us the entire time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're like I'm trying to think. You're like Nick Foles. You came off the bench and won us the chip. You brought so much to the show, Tanya. You're definitely going to come back. Doug, thank you for booking.
Thank you,
Tanya, to be on the show. And of course, James, you're always riding shoddy with us, and we really appreciate your expertise.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for doing this. Keep up the good work.
Keep doing it. By the way, in 2 weeks, Arizona and Florida are next on up to the bat. So we're gonna have a very interesting show.
We have a debate.
Your hands, a lot of Purell family. Thank you for joining. Support the show. And the last thing I ask is we are trying to elevate the presence of all of our voices on the show through Found in Translation. So please, familia, and even the people watching this now, please subscribe, download the podcast, like the Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, which you're going to see these videos on after the live show. We really need that kind of support to build up. I don't know, Tanya, if you know, I was on MSNBC a few weeks ago, so we're trying to build the movement up, fam. So, and as I say, and I'm a Philly guy, so I'm like Kevin Hart. If I'm gonna make it, y'all coming with me. That's how I look at it.
Thank you. Don't forget about us little people, Ray.
Pleasure.
Thank you again, especially Albert Garcia, who was behind the scenes.
LB. Thank you, LB.
This guy's doing 2 JOBs at the same time. So thank you, James. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, LB. Thank you, fam. Enjoy this. And thank you for joining the Super Tuesday edition of Found in Translation. And if you didn't,
feel the burn.
vote soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello.